One question that I get from you all is generally, what do you do when it comes to choosing a flight school? How do you go about choosing a flight school, and what are the steps I would recommend when trying to pick a flight school? Well, in this video, I'm going to touch on that. I've covered this in some of my videos in the past, but I want to touch on this again because I've gotten a lot of new subscribers. And by the way, thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. We are at 2,000 subscribers at this point, and that is amazing. Thank you so much. But here's the deal. When it comes to choosing a flight school, there are a few things that I want you to keep in mind. A big portion of this always has to do with the cost of training, which we know it's expensive. It takes time to either save up the money or even raise the funds. And I understand that, this is always a very huge investment for a lot of people, which it was for me as well. But here's what I want you to get. When it comes to choosing a flight school, don't always go to the cheapest flight school because it's cheap for a reason. I can list a lot of stories. I can talk about all the stories from now to literally tomorrow about different flight schools that would quote you very cheap amount to finish your training. And guess what? Most of those people that will end up enrolling in those schools will either have to face a lot of struggles to complete their training, or they wouldn't even finish their training, or they would just end up giving up on it because those flight schools will end up being mostly fraudulent. So keep that in mind. There's always those flight schools out there that will tell you that you can finish in 1 month, or you can finish in 6 weeks, or you can finish your private in 3 weeks. No one can train you to finish your private in 3 weeks unless you have experience, like you've been flying, but you just don't have the rating yet. Maybe you fly with someone that has a rating and you're already exposed to this, maneuvers and all the things that you need to do. So the first thing that I will always recommend to you is, before you choose a flight school, understand the type of program the flight school is going to, train you on. For example, is it Part 61? Is it Part 141? To my friends and folks in the United Kingdom or in Europe, it's literally the difference between modular and integrated. So the modular would be considered Part 61 and integrated would be considered Part 141. Now, the whole idea behind this is, with a Part 61 program, you have the ability to almost structure your training by yourself with your instructor, and there isn't that focused curriculum that you have to follow. For example, you can literally find a flight instructor, find an airplane, and you guys rent the airplane and you get your training done. And you take your time as much as you want. You can literally knock everything out in 1 week, of course, depending on what curriculum the instructor comes up for you, or you can just do everything, at your own pace. On the other hand, with Part 141, it's generally approved for flight schools that have met the FAA standards in terms of provision of certain infrastructure, and of course a curriculum that is guided and approved by the FAA. And the goal is that once you enroll in that program, you have to stick to that program unless you opt out of it. Now, once you understand the program that suits your need, for example, it's a Part 61, 141. Now, I can't say that one is better, but your situation will determine which is better for you. So if you're someone that wants something that is focused and you want to knock everything out in maybe 2 months, let's say you're private, you want to knock it out in, let's say, 2 months, right? That is something that is mostly achievable under 141. It's achievable under Part 61 as well. But the point here is it's more focused. You can literally go from subject to subject and you can finish the curriculum in the stated time. On the other hand, with Part 61, you can literally start with cross-country today and tomorrow you start to do your solos, or you have that flexibility. That's the point. Now, once you figure out what suits you, then you can then move on to maybe cost at this point, because no matter what it is, whether you do 61 or 141, both will be expensive. Now, expensive is obviously relative. It might be 60,000 for one, it might be 80,000 for the other. But the point here is it will be expensive. And I can't say one is cheaper, because at the end of the day, whether you do 160, whether you do Part 61 or you do 141, you will have to be proficient before you go for a check ride. So as long as you're proficient, let's say you have to do, let's say, 15 or 20 flights, for example, and you can knock it out in those 20 flights and do all the things that you need to do and meet the standards in 20 flights, then of course, whether you do 61 or 141 doesn't matter. But the thing that you need to keep in mind is, when you are considering cost, please understand that cheaper doesn't necessarily mean better. And cheaper doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to achieve your goal. So don't always go with the cheapest school out there. The other thing that I always want to recommend to you is to always consider, obviously, spending time on your own, going through the maneuvers, or spending time going through the ground lessons on the ground where it's costing you zero. So for example, if you need to use like flight training devices, or you have your own flight simulator in a way, like Microsoft Flight Simulator or X-Plane, you can always practice all these maneuvers there. You can always practice all your call outs and flows and checklists and all that stuff, so that by the time you get on the airplane, you will save a lot of money in that process. That's the best way to save money. And if you want to really see it go into effect, practice mostly on the ground. For example, even with your instructor, you can go into the flight simulator or flight training device and practice a lot of things that you would normally do on the airplane, so that by the time you get on the airplane, you are already proficient. That is very important. One of the next recommendations that I will give you is, of course, when it comes to like your written test, your FAA written test in this case, this is something you can mostly study for on your own. So you want to take the time to start studying and practicing so that you can take that written test once and for all. The next thing I want to recommend to you is, do not take too much breaks in between your training. So if you choose to do Part 61, even though you have the flexibility to choose your program and mash it together as you want and get it done, consider not spending too much time at taking too much breaks, because that would lead to loss of skills and knowledge and proficiency, which would mean that when you come back, you would have to spend more time training, refreshing before you get up to speed. So the recommendation I always give is, make sure that you have a certain fixed amount of money. Let's say they've quoted you to finish your private with 15,000. I would say try to budget 20,000 so that it is ready for that training. So that when you start that training, you can finish everything. And like I said, you've already budgeted an extra $5,000 on that. So let's say you go over, or you have to repeat some flights, or you have some bad days. The point is, you can knock out your private in full, so that when you come back, let's say you now have to take a break again, when you come back, you're not starting from your private again, you're moving on to maybe your instrument or your commercial. That is one big recommendation that I have, because that is one way to literally waste money. You don't want to come in and do one flight and take a break for 2 weeks and come back again, do one flight, and you end up repeating the same thing, which means that you end up losing a lot of money over time. Last recommendation that I have for you, not to make this video too long, is to find a school with a good reputation and good instructors. When I say good instructors, of course you wouldn't know this going in, right? But the point is, always have an instructor that you can feel comfortable talking with, that you have a good rapport with. It's very important, because your instructor is your mentor, and if you do not have a good rapport with this instructor, it can cost you a lot of money. And of course, the airplane that you fly as well. Airplanes will generally have various different costs associated with flying them. So some airplanes are cheaper than the other. Consider that when you're choosing the airplane to train on, because at the end of the day, if you choose an airplane that is expensive, it means that your training cost will be more expensive. If you choose a cheap airplane, it's of course going to be cheaper for you. So finding a good instructor, finding a good school, a decent school, find a good instructor, cheaper airplane, all of this working together with you, working hard on your own, studying, doing your written test ahead of time, practicing your maneuvers on your own, so that when you show up, you're ready, will save you a lot of money in the long run. I just wanted to share this with you. I hope that you found value in it. Please don't forget to drop a like, don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for reaching 2,000 subscribers. I would love to see you in my next video.